want to talk a little bit about interoperability. This has really been the buzzword in health IT and health technology now for the last few years, and it's really important as a concept to understand because this is really where we're going to be moving in terms of all medical technologies and health technologies, is the ability for individual records from many different kinds of reporting systems and information gathering systems to all be put into one giant portal, and for that information to be shared with a central repository where all that information could be analyzed and used for quality improvement, for population health, and to really allow for a system that removes the need, as we were talking about earlier with the smart card technology, for providers to have to write letters and faxes and share clinical information among providers. It is a common practice in medicine and has been for centuries for a healthcare provider to have to write a clinical letter to be shared with another provider about your history, about your diagnosis, about your treatment. Imagine that regardless of whatever provider you went to, that they were able to simply query a database, type in your name, and know everything about your medical history. That is where we're moving to in healthcare. How quickly and when and how we're going to get there is a little bit up for grabs. But I want you to think about and to watch the video here on YouTube about interoperability and what the goals on the part of the federal government are for interoperability. I do also want to show you a link for those of you that are interested, which is to healthit.gov. This is the government's health IT information hub. You can go to that website and look at all the different initiatives and all the different things that are happening in health IT in the United States right now. It's really very fascinating, the movement that is happening toward interoperability that's being facilitated by the federal government. Another important concept for you to understand is what really a health information organization is, or an HIO. This is one of the things we're going to need in order to achieve interoperability. And this is an independent organization that puts together all of the information into one place, right? And that these health information organizations will be the portals, will be the repository for information from all these different sources: health systems, clinics, federally qualified health systems, payers, and there have been many starts and stops of building a health information exchange or health information organizations in various states across the country. In Connecticut, we actually 5 or 6 years ago put in place a major effort with huge amounts of funding to build a health information exchange that would allow for providers and payers and patients to all put information into this database, and then for it to be able to be queried by anyone in the state. Due to some administrative problems and some insufficient funding and really a lack of the technology to get there, that initiative kind of fell apart under its own weight. But where we're moving toward is, like this diagram shows, information and data being put into a health information exchange system by all of the parties in the top left, all those health information sources. It being made accessible and interoperable through the use of a health information exchange, and then information then being able to be reported out in the form of health analytics, in terms of patient messaging, in terms of being able to access that information by providers or caregivers or patients. And so what you see is that this is a very highly complex and interactive system that has to be built. And we're kind of in a technological race to put together these health information organizations or health information exchanges that will allow for information to flow back and forth between all these various parties. Now, this diagram kind of shows a sort of national health information network, and this is really what healthit.gov is really trying to achieve. This wouldn't just be something local, like the state of Connecticut's health information exchange, but in fact, all of the state-based health information organizations would then feed into a national health information network. And so this is kind of the big picture of where we're going. And whether this would be via HIOs or HIEs whether this would be that certain kinds of healthcare delivery systems and research institutes and public health organizations are reporting independently to a national health information database. That has yet to be worked out, but that is what is being put in place now, such that we will have an interoperable national health information database sometime in the next decade. Now, one of the concepts that's important to understand is the difference between sort of innovation, diffusion, and utilization. So innovation is when we create a new product, where we come up with a new idea and try to develop that product for use. When a new product, such as the first MRI machine, was in the process of being developed, there was a need for a machine that could provide higher resolution scanning in the way that MRI machines do. This innovation and the research and development that goes into that was done, and then the first MRI machine was acquired by Hospital A. People saw Hospital A's MRI machine resulted in increased utilization. They were able to do testing and reporting that no one else was able to do, and so Hospital B bought one. Hospital C bought one. That's the process of diffusion. And when we see rapid diffusion taking place is when it's very clear that a new technology is cost effective and that it's beneficial. And it provides a compatibility with what hospitals and health systems are seeing that patients demand or that providers demand. We also see really rapid diffusion when this technology can be billed for and reimbursed by providers or by the government. And so that's where you really see that sweet spot being hit of when you see a new product or service being developed. We've seen examples where diffusion has not gone well. Electronic medical records were very slow to be diffused until we saw the HITECH Act come into place. And all of a sudden we went from 40% of U.S. hospitals having electronic medical records to now having more than 75% of them having medical records, right? So cost and reimbursement and creating the incentives was what changed the level of diffusion from just a few health systems having this and a few hospitals in the United States having this technology to having almost all of them having it. Then we see utilization. Once a new technology is acquired, almost always that technology, if the cost benefit and the health technology assessment has been done properly, it is going to be used. And so because we have something that we call the technological imperative. If there is a new machine, if there is a new drug, and it is acquired by a health system or by a hospital or by a provider, and it is put out there for use by patients, it is going to be used. We always want to have the newest, best, and brightest machine, the newest, best, and most effective, most expensive drug, right? And so utilization, if a technology can be designed, can be diffused, and made accessible to patients, it's going to be used. And that's what we call the technological imperative, the push for us as consumers or for us as providers or for us as health systems and healthcare organizations to acquire and use the most state-of-the-art technology possible despite the cost. And that has been one of our Achilles heels in the U.S. healthcare system, which has made us, yes, the most technologically savvy, the most innovative, the most advanced healthcare system in the world, but it also has contributed significantly to the requirements of capital investment and increased cost. And so because we know that there is a technological imperative in the United States and in our healthcare system, one of the things that the federal government did to sort of pull back and rein in on this technological imperative was to put in place Certificate of Need, or CON laws. These laws at the federal level required that states approve any acquisition of a new major piece of medical equipment being purchased through capital budget or before a new hospital or healthcare facility could be built or renovated. And the reason why Certificate of Need laws were put in place was exactly to curb the sort of rampant expansion and building of new hospitals without any real assessment at the state level of whether or not we really needed another MRI machine in the state of Connecticut. Federal Certificate of Need requirements were discontinued in the 1980s but many states, including the state of Connecticut, have decided to keep those laws on the books to prevent, particularly where healthcare budgets are tight and where there's very close-knit and high coverage healthcare systems throughout states, to rein in those capital expenditures. And so Connecticut is one of those states where you have to file a certificate of need before any new healthcare facility is built, any major renovation or expansion of healthcare services is being done, or before any major capital investment is being made in your healthcare organization. So these states are really trying to retain some central control over the planning and use of new facilities and new equipment. This has been very controversial. It has been shown that the Certificate of Need laws didn't affect the rate at which certain technologies were being adopted in many states, and that in fact in many states the state was just kind of a rubber stamp signing off on whatever hospitals were requesting. It certainly didn't reduce cost, at least for some medical technologies, and it didn't have any effect on per capita healthcare expenditure. So of course the question is, why do we still have Certificate of Need laws in the state of Connecticut? And there are many people who would say, well, we shouldn't. That this is just an artifact of an old federal program and that there's no need for this. But there are others that would say, and I think if you ask people in Hartford, why do we still have Certificate of Need laws? What they say is that it does effectively rein in, and it constrains the decision making and what healthcare executives and leaders of health systems will even consider. Because they know that if they have to go apply for a Certificate of Need, they're going to have to demonstrate that in fact there is significant need for certain kinds of healthcare procedures or equipment in their hospital or in that particular region that isn't being met. And so what it means is it definitely puts in place some bureaucratic hurdles that hospitals have to jump over in order to get new equipment or new facilities. But many people would argue that it constrains sort of the rampant expansion that we saw in healthcare during the 1970s and 1980s. So there's some pros and there's some cons here, and I'd be very interested to hear in the online discussion what some of you think about Certificate of Need. When we look at Certificate of Need regulation in the United States, we see kind of this rapid advancement from the 1970s through the 1990s. We see that at present that there are a significant number of significant need states. So in the 1980s, everybody but Louisiana had one. Then we saw sort of a pulling back and a pulling away of Certificate of Need laws. In the South and in the Northeast, almost every state still has them. And so we've seen this change over time. And so this is where we are today, the Certificate of Need as of today. So states like Indiana, Pennsylvania no longer have Certificate of Need legislation at the state level. Most Western states do not. However, most states in the central and eastern half of the country do still have these laws on the books. And so if you do a comparative analysis of these states, what you see is that technological innovation, expansion of healthcare facilities isn't really different in these various states. And so many people would argue that Certificate of Need laws are no longer needed in the United States. When we think about innovation and we think about diffusion, there are a number of different things that drive technological innovation and diffusion. One, of course, are our anthrocultural beliefs and values, right? The technological imperative that we want to have the newest and greatest drugs and medical devices and information technologies. Another that really drives this is the drive toward more and more sophisticated medical specialization, right? So as we become more and more specialized in the care we provide, there are more and more genetic tests available. There are more and more sophisticated scanning machines that can look for cancers, tumors, or things like that. So we see that push. Financing and payment obviously drives medical innovation, as we talked about earlier. If there is financing for it, if there is reimbursement for a technology, it is that much more likely to be diffused into the healthcare system. We also see that if there is competition we are more likely to see a rapid innovation and diffusion of technologies than if there's just one provider out there of a particular technology, because that competition then forces it to be marketed and to be aggressively sold. And so what we see is that the more competitors there are, the more likely there is to be innovation and diffusion of new technologies. We also see that there are significant expenditures on R&D that drive this innovation and the continued need for research and development and improvement of medical technologies and devices. We also see that supply-side controls can rein in innovation and diffusion, as well as government policies can kind of change the pace or the rate at which innovation and diffusion of medical technologies take place. What we see is, of course, in the regulations of drugs, medical devices, and biologics, the big government driver, the big policymaker is, of course, the Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug Administration's goal is to be the gatekeeper and to put in place an approval process that only allows drugs that are proven to be cost-effective, safe, and effective on the market. Right? And so that's the role that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration plays. And what we see here is that there's been an evolution in terms of the scope and role of the Food and Drug Administration, going back all the way to the beginning of the 20th century. And so there have been many new laws and policies put in place. Many of these you'll learn about in the Law and Public Health class that really put in place the system that we have today. That really allows for the Food and Drug Administration to have very broad oversight over any product related to human health that comes to market that is marketed as a drug, medical device, or biologic. So what we see is that there have been many of these changes that have been put in place specifically for medical devices. Medical devices are classed. And so some things require pre-market approval before that they can be sold. Others have certain kinds of specific labeling requirements and performance standards. We also saw that the Safe Medical Devices Act required as late as 1990 for the reporting of seriously adverse events or device-related injuries. Before that, there was no such requirement on medical device companies. We've also seen significant advances in terms of the regulation of biologics. These are bioactive compounds that are used, and so what we saw most recently is that you could market generic versions of biosimilars or biologics in the United States made from overseas companies. There is, of course, a lot of research that's done on medical technology. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, which is the federal government's quality improvement and healthcare services research arm, they focus on whether or not health technologies actually reduce cost, improve quality, or result in better access. And so they do a lot of the technology assessments on the part of the federal government. They also fund a lot of research that's done by academics and done in the private sector to evaluate how effective new medical technologies are at improving the healthcare system. The National Institutes of Health also conducts basic and applied biomedical research. They may also do some research on medical devices or other kinds of things, but really between NIH, which does a lot of the basic and applied biomedical work, and the Agency on Healthcare Research and Quality that does research on medical technologies, innovations in care delivery, we see most of the research on any kind of new medical innovation being done by one of these two groups. So what do we know about the impact of health technology of all kinds on the quality of care? We obviously know that it has improved healthcare quality. There are treatments for diseases that we didn't have before that are the result of medical innovation and research and development. Obviously, that's true. We've improved diagnosis and treatment significantly over the last 100 years for sure, and even in the last 20 years. It's been improved significantly for a wide range of diseases. We now have treatments that are more effective. When you think about the drugs that were available in the 1950s and 1960s to treat cancer, for example, versus the drugs that are available today, they're highly more effective. People who are diagnosed with breast cancer today live for 15, 20 years sometimes in remission with no recurrence of cancer. That was not true in the 1950s and 60s. We now have less invasive procedures. We have microsurgeries. We have robotic surgeries. We have the ability for people to get hips replaced and go home the next day. So we have many, many better, less invasive, higher quality procedures. They're also safer, happening with fewer medical errors. And ultimately better outcomes, quicker recovery, longer life expectancy, all of those things. But not every technology is going to result in those kinds of good quality outcomes. Every single technology has to be assessed as to whether or not it is going to be more effective, higher levels of safety, less invasive than the procedures that already exist. Otherwise, there's no reason to put those new technologies on the market if we have better, more effective technologies that already exist. And so there's always this race to develop more effective, less invasive, safer procedures. And how we know that is by engaging in health technology assessments. We also see significant improvements in terms of quality of life. We have much more effective tools for pain management. We have prosthetic devices. We have people who were not able to speak now able to speak through various kinds of voice recording devices and automated speech devices. There's a wide range of things that we've seen impact people who have a wide range of chronic conditions and acute conditions, have improvements on their quality of life. We've seen that, of course, the impact of medical technology has been that it has resulted in medical cost inflation. Some technologies, of course, are cost neutral or cost saving, but in general, costs in the U.S. healthcare system have gone up because of medical technology, because of its acquisition, because of the need to train and have personnel that can use those technologies, and those people who are knowledgeable about those technologies have to be paid more than people who aren't. We have to have the facilities and the space and all the technological requirements to run and use those technologies and use that equipment. And of course, we know that the newest and best technologies cost more. They get reimbursed for more, for higher levels. And so what we see is as those technologies are diffused and then used, cost inflation happens. There are, of course, many cases of cost-saving technologies like antiretroviral therapies, which significantly reduce the cost of caring for patients with HIV/AIDS. We see that there are cost-saving technologies in having less invasive, better outcomes for hip replacements, right? Being able to do these very small incision microsurgeries for lumbar spine microdiscectomies, for example. So there's a wide range of procedures that actually have resulted in significant cost savings. But most of them are not saving costs in the sense that the procedure or the device itself is cheaper. That almost never happens. What happens is that the cost reductions are these sort of indirect reductions coming from reduced hospital stay, reducing medical errors, or reducing the cost of labor. Making a surgery that used to take 10 hours down to a surgery that takes 2 hours using a robotic device, that's a significant cost savings. And so the robotic device itself, of course, costs probably tens of millions of dollars, which is much more than the previous way the procedure had been done using a non-robotic system. However, when you add in all the cost savings of that procedure being able to be done quicker and more effectively, you then have cost savings. Medical technology has also had a significant impact on access, using mobile equipment and mobile devices, using GPS technology. The fact that we have telemedicine, where you can call up a physician on your laptop, that has improved healthcare access significantly. We also see that it's changed how we deliver healthcare. Of course, the butt of all jokes is the fact that now when you go in to see a provider, the provider doesn't actually look at you. They're looking at their laptop and they're typing away while they're hearing all your information, right? And they don't even make eye contact with you. That's been a negative impact. But some of the positive impacts we've seen is that care can be delivered in other settings. Remote monitoring can happen. We have telecommunication. We can actually communicate with our providers from home without even getting on the phone. We can send a note through MyChart. We allow for a wide range of information sharing systems, barcoding, a simple operations management thing. Now that we have the ability to use RFID tagging and barcoding systems, we can track every single drug, every vial, every pill in the hospital in a way that we couldn't 10 or 15 years ago. Even simple things like video conferencing, being able to call up and have a consult by video of someone's patient with a provider halfway around the world. Those things have really revolutionized how healthcare is provided. There are some downsides, but there also have been a lot of upsides. We've also seen that the practice of medicine has now become global. The innovations that we develop, that we do research and development on here, whether it be drugs, whether it be new machinery, become diffused not just across the United States, but around the world. What we also see is a significant increase in medical tourism. So it's not just that medical innovations are going from the United States to other parts of the world. Many of the medical technologies and advances in surgeries and medical devices and other kinds of therapies are happening in places like India or Germany or Japan. And people, instead of having those technologies diffused to the United States, some usually because of regulatory restrictions, the Food and Drug Administration won't approve those drugs or technologies here, or because that approval process takes sometimes 10 or 15 years for a new medical device or drug to come to market through our US FDA, patients simply go to Japan to get that treatment. They'll go to India to get that surgery. It may be lower cost, it may be higher tech. And so what we see is that there is medical tourism of US citizens to other parts of the world. And of course, we also have medical tourism of people who live in other countries like in Europe or like in Saudi Arabia or in India who come to the United States to get the high-tech products and services that we have here. So it's people are now using healthcare in a global setting. We've also seen an impact of medical technology on ethical issues in healthcare. Now, of course, this is my area of specialization, but I'm not going to spend more than just a slide or two on it. But what we've seen is, of course, that significant advances in medical technology, having ventilators, having certain kinds of genetic testings and screenings, have raised really important medical ethics issues, which you're going to talk all about in the healthcare ethics class. Many of these innovations we weren't really prepared to deal with as a society. So we had significant advances in the 1970s and 1980s in vitro fertilization, where people had made in the laboratory many embryos that could be used for implantation. But when all of the embryos weren't implanted, what do we do with them? How are they stored? How are they disposed of? This was something we hadn't really thought of. We got caught up in the technological imperative to see, could we do this thing? Could we, in fact, get a sperm and an egg to unite in a petri dish and have it successfully implant in a woman's womb? Yes, we can do that. Except, oops, we made all these extra embryos and now we don't know what to do with them. So that's just one example, and there are many other examples on this slide, of how advances in medical technology, innovations in healthcare delivery, simple things like ventilators, resulted in complex decisions about how do we know and how do we decide and who decides when to take a patient off a ventilator. Those are the kinds of things that we've seen have a big impact on the field of healthcare delivery and specifically bioethics. It's also raised questions about what is the social value or the worth of a technology to society. And so this has resulted in, because these questions are not just about cost, but they're also about quality of life. They're also about these ethical issues. And so one of the ways in which we evaluate whether a technology is worth investing in and disseminating is to look at how many quality or health adjusted life years on average a new technology or medical innovation will have. So an increase in life expectancy will result in the following. So if we use this new medical technology, if we use this new heart procedure, and it results in 10 years of extra life on average per person of high quality of life for this individual, but it costs $50 million to do. You come up with a ratio and you come up with a set of values that help you determine whether or not that cost per quality adjusted life year is actually reasonable for the healthcare system to expend. Sometimes those ratios will turn out very well for technologies. Sometimes low-cost interventions will end up resulting in not very much in terms of a quality or health adjusted life year. And so even though something is low cost, it also results in very little benefit for society. And so the decision is, well, we're not going to disseminate that technology. We're not going to make that change because it doesn't cost very much, but it doesn't get us very much either. And so there are entire fields of study that look at how you calculate and how you use these health adjusted and quality adjusted life years to make broad societal determinations about whether or not certain technologies are worth investing in and worth disseminating into healthcare systems. This is one aspect of health technology assessment. The examination and reporting on the various features of medical technology. Quality adjusted and health adjusted life years are just one of those ways of analyzing health technologies that falls under the cost and cost effectiveness category. There also are assessments that are done based on whether a technology is safe, whether it is effective, whether it is feasible to be used in the healthcare system, whether it actually can be disseminated and utilized, how many indications or how many people are likely to be using this technology. And then we also have to look at some of the social and ethical issues related to some of these technologies. And why is health technology assessment so important? There are a billion different technologies we could develop as a society. We have to, as a society, make a determination about which of those technologies are worth pursuing to bring to market. It's also important because we know we spend a wide range and a significant amount of money on ineffective healthcare and on healthcare services that do not improve health outcomes. We know that because we lag amongst all of our developed world peers in terms of those health outcomes and in terms of using effective treatments for care. So we need to develop new ways of delivering care, new medical technologies, and new ways of improving health outcomes. But in order to know which new of the billion things we could develop, we have to go through this process of health technology assessment to evaluate which avenues seem like they will be most fruitful for improving the effectiveness of care and improving health outcomes. So, how we typically do this most frequently is through clinical trials. We look to see first whether something is safe and whether it is likely to be effective through a very carefully and systematically designed research study. We control the observations. We usually do this. The gold standard in clinical trials is, of course, the randomized control clinical trial, where subjects are assigned at random, unknown to the subject and unknown to the researcher, to various treatment arms. Some people in those treatment arms will get the standard of care. Some people in the treatment arm may get a placebo or non-treatment, and others will get the new treatment that's being determined for whether it's effective. Obviously, in order for these clinical trials to take place, you have to have human participants who have to consent to participation in this health technology assessment activity. Typically, these clinical trials occur over 3 or 4 phases, all of which is overseen and monitored by the Food and Drug Administration. The first phase of clinical trials is called phase 1, which is where a new, never tested in human substance before is put into healthy volunteers to determine what is the safe and effective dosing level of that. Phase 2 looks at efficacy, how effective is it in people who actually have the condition or disorder in terms of treating that disorder. And phase 3 then looks at how cost effective it is in a larger group of patients. And then phase 4 is the phase that is sort of done while it is being brought to market and post-market to see whether or not, compared to existing treatments on the market, that drug is still considered to be safe and effective. All of this must be done with informed consent and a high level of ethics and integrity, which you'll talk all about in the healthcare ethics class. And privacy has to be respected under HIPAA. And all of these trials have to be approved at the institutional level by what's called an institutional research board or institutional review board. And that board looks at all the ethical considerations to determine whether or not it's appropriate to go forward. So we look at cost benefit, we look at cost effectiveness, and we determine whether or not this new technology is worth disseminating. One of the most important concepts that you should understand about this is cost effectiveness. You have to have a marginal benefit over the marginal cost. And where you see that the marginal benefits equal the cost, that's called the optimum point. And if you can get to that point, then most likely a drug or new technology is going to be approved and disseminated into the marketplace. Beyond the optimum point, cost effectiveness is negative, right? So what you want to see is where the costs and benefits are equal, and where you want to really be at kind of the flat of the curve at the top is really where you want to be, because high intensity care results in a lot of waste. And so what we see there is that you really want to have something that is cost effective in the sense that you have marginal benefits where you also have marginal or not significant costs. You want to see those kind of equalizing out. You don't want to have either one disproportionately balanced to the other. Cost benefit, I've already talked about some. This is where we talk about quality adjusted life years or health adjusted life years. You can't actually put, and this is really important, a specific dollar value on a quality adjusted life year. So it's all going to be relative to other treatments and other things in the healthcare system. You do measure costs and benefits in terms of dollars, but there can't be a specific value assigned to any particular quality. And so it's all relative. And it is used as a common unit of measurement, but it's always a quality adjusted life year versus quality adjusted life years for the standard treatment. So that's never specifically put as that a life of a person with prostate cancer is worth $5,657, right? But what you could see is that if treatment A results in 5.6 quality adjusted life years and treatment B results in 7.2 quality adjusted life years, all other things being held equal, then treatment A would be deemed to be more cost beneficial than treatment A. So where we have to go is really looking at health technology assessment. This is something that primarily is being done in the private sector, funded by pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies, but with the guidance and with the involvement of policymakers and organizations like the Food and Drug Administration. You really need to make sure that the metrics and the methods you're using when you're analyzing various medical devices and drugs are comparable and that it's standardized, so that you really are comparing apples to apples to ensure that when you are comparing drug A and drug B, you really are comparing them with the same yardstick. And that's been very difficult, but a very important piece of ensuring that health technology assessments actually reflect what will happen when that drug or when that medical device is actually put out into the world and used by consumers. Obviously, this has to incorporate ethical and legal and social concerns as well. It's not simply just a cost benefit or looking at just the quality adjusted life years. You have to put all of these pieces together. There are, of course, a wide range of ethical issues that come into these kinds of assessments. The reason why we're doing these health technology assessments is because of an ethical issue. We do not have an unlimited amount of money to spend on healthcare treatments. And so if we're going to continue to develop new treatments, we have made the moral judgment that in fact we only should develop and spend on those treatments that actually are going to improve health outcomes and improve quality of life. So that basic decision has value judgments and moral components built into it right from the get-go. There also are a wide range of issues about ensuring that even if a therapy or a treatment or a medical device is going to be effective, that it isn't priced so cost prohibitively that the people who need to have access to it can get it. And so a lot of the concerns and issues around, for example, antiretroviral therapy for HIV/AIDS was that these drugs were developed and were tested on poor populations who could never then afford the drug. This research was done in South America and done in Africa, where the drugs were proven to be effective through the health technology assessment process. And then all of those findings and all of the drugs were then made available only in developed countries where people could afford to pay high retail prices. And so there's been a lot of attention in the last 15 to 20 years on how to ensure that the benefits of clinical research actually accrue to the populations that contribute most significantly to those research findings. And so what we see is that there are very clear standards and rules for the ethical conduct of clinical research, all of which you're going to learn about in the healthcare ethics class later in this program. So, how did the Affordable Care Act affect medical technologies? There's a new excise tax on medical devices. There was a significant reining in on medical device companies. There is a new Biologic Price Competition and Innovation Act, which was amplified by the Affordable Care Act, which allows the Food and Drug Administration to more effectively regulate biosimilars in the same way that they regulate generic drugs. And it also added some fees for those companies that are developing biosimilars that want to market them in the United States to charge certain kinds of fees for the pre-market review of those. So ultimately, the ACA has amplified many of the other features that have come from previous laws, such as HIPAA and the HITECH Act. It really put in place a lot of the goals for interoperability and to really try to meet those goals and to really put a focus on using and reimbursing for the most cost-effective and efficient technologies, whether that be health information technology, but also other clinical technologies and medical devices that will allow for better quality care in a more cost-effective way. So ultimately, health technology has been a blessing, but sometimes comes with some disadvantages. We see these advances have significantly increased costs and increased the complexity of healthcare delivery and really the use of computers and information technology. The next step is really to leverage those technologies to begin to bend the cost curve and to ensure that care is being delivered in an appropriate and sensitive manner, and to actually leverage technologies and medical devices to improve outcomes while simultaneously reducing costs. And there's lots of evidence from other countries to suggest that that's possible. We just have to figure out how to do it in our very unique U.S. healthcare system.